Cool. Thanks, everybody. Could I please ask opening government to introduce themselves with their speaking orders, preferred pronouns, and whether they consent to be streamed?
I'm speaking first. My name is Neta. I don't have a preference. It's okay to be streamed. Yeah.
And Miriam speaking second, and sure.
Cool. Same questions for opening opposition?
Miri speaking first. She, I'm okay with being streamed.
Lucy speaking second, she exclusively, and sure.
Thank you very much. And closing government?
Speaking first, Raphael, here they, please.
Speaking second, Lucy, she, please.
Cool. And in closing opposition?
Gwen speaking first, she, her, I consent to being streamed.
Pascal speaking second, he, him, his, I also consent.
Cool. Nice. Obviously you all know standing orders. I will give some sort of air clap to signal that you have had your minute. I won't give an actual clap because that would be useless for all of you and just everyone in the flat would think I'm weird. So good luck, everybody. And I call upon the Prime Minister to begin the case for the prop bench.
Right. You have a timer for me. Okay, 3, 2, 1. We think that these anti-feminist organizations are doing a huge harm, right? We think that A, they are targeting the type of women who grew up in a more conservative setting, who are coming to be on their own and to believe that they have power and are making them disempowered, are taking away the power that they were starting to get. And we think they're also targeting the type of men who are just looking for any rationalization for the fact that they deserve to have power over women, that this is justified. We think that as a feminist hacker, we feel that these organizations are doing terrible harm to the society, and we would like to stop them in the best way that we know as a hacker. We're going to talk about how we think we're changing the ability of these organizations to do the harm that they're doing to society. We're going to talk about what I care about as a feminist hacker, what are my values, and why I am likely to believe this is the correct thing to do. Shortly, in terms of what are the types of things we're talking about, so really denial of service attacks to take the site down, trying to hack into the social media sites in order to take down their content and maybe put alternative content on my own, hacking into those servers so they don't have access to the data about people who are part of the organization, and so on and so forth. If we're talking about phishing, we think that we are probably not talking about just stealing money out of personal bank accounts, but the type of phishing which is going to help you hack into the organization in order to change their ability to function as in their site, their social media, and things along those lines. We think that feminists, so yeah, I'm a person who believes in feminism. We think that probably what we mean by hacker is someone who is sort of in this community, reads hacker forums, obviously knows how to program, and we think that we're probably, for the debate to be interesting, are a very talented hacker who can actually pull off the things that she is desiring to do. So let's talk about what these organizations do. So we think that basically the world today is a digital world, is a world where everything goes online, right? And we think that that means that the online community is a very important tool for these organizations to get more followers and to spread their message, whether this is on their social media, on their own sites. We think that also in order to organize campaigns in the real world and to organize meetings and things like that, they need their servers with all the information about the members, with all the ability to contact in the forums where they talk to each other. We think that, and just to bring out information into the world, and we think this is super important, right? And we think that it is important to understand that not everybody in the world is either very feminist or very anti-feminist, right? There are people who are undecided who can change their opinions because of these organizations, right? We think that we're talking about people who grew up in a very conservative setting, right? And now they, maybe they're in a little bit more liberal setting and they're starting to wonder about who am I? What is my place as a woman? Am I supposed to get married at a young age now that I'm like 20 something and give up on the rest of my career, or should I follow my career and get married later? What should I make? This is actually affecting their decisions. Should I subject myself to my husband, or should I also do the things that I want? And we think that they are likely to take these people who are undecided and change their mind, right? We also think that there are many men who want to have power over women, who think that it is better that we have liberal laws, it is better that we have anti-workplace harassment laws, it is better that we have all of these reforms, and having a woman say, yes, you are right, yes, this is actually what women believe as well, gives them a lot of power to rationalize that, demanded, rationalize them being mistreating towards their own wives when they don't let them the freedom that they deserve, and also in supporting political things that are bad for women in general, right? We think that the thing is that as a hacker, I'm just able to hinder their ability to do these things significantly, right? We think that it's much harder for them to get to these populations and to actually get the message out there because their sites are constantly being taken down, the server is unavailable, they don't have the data that they would like to have. We think that it's very hard to organize events and campaigns in the real world at the point where you don't have the forums, you don't have the whole everyone's phone numbers and everyone emails because we took them away. But we also think that this actually gives us the ability to take these platforms and switch them on their heads, because now I take their Facebook account and I write in the Facebook account, no, here is a liberal thing that you should listen to, here's more explanations to the other side. Here is why all the ideas that they've told you are untrue, and there are other ways to think about the world. So this means that we can take those vulnerable women or those men who are just looking for rationalization and put a mirror in their faces that maybe this is not the correct way to think and there are other ways to think which can be better for them. We think in this way we are giving these people an alternative narrative that is super important. Before we continue about what I care about as a hacker, second house, CEO, yeah.
Okay, either these sites are not very influential, in which you are getting a benefit for maybe a couple thousand people, or they are very influential, meaning there are a lot of them and they have high security, meaning that you're never going to be able to take that many of them down.
Yeah, so look, we think that the question is, as a specific feminist hacker, what is my desire to do, right? Because this is a perspective motion. We think that even if I'm unable to topple the whole system, I want to do my part. We think that obviously I'm going to talk to my other feminist hacker friends on my feminist hacker forums and encourage them all to do the same thing like me. We think that often large organizations are very bad at cybersecurity. We've seen a lot of hacks into organizations that you would have thought are very, very good, even like big banks and big corporations, because cybersecurity is very complex. And since I am a smart hacker and I'm exposed to all these things, we think that I am likely to succeed. But let's talk about what I care about, right? Because we think that they might tell us no, but this hurts free speech and this is something that you would view as illegitimate. Why is this not true? Right? We think there are two reasons why I would think this is the legitimate and correct thing to do. One thing is that notice that I am a hacker, right? This means we don't know what level of hacker, but probably I have some interest. That means I read hacker forums. That means I have a lot of interactions with other people who are into programming and into this sort of hacking specifically. We think that means that I'm constantly exposed to the narrative that hacking is the correct way to do activism, that hacking is the correct way to try to deal with problems. I believe that this is the source of a way to solve problems in the world. I believe that this is the way to move society forward. I believe all the things we said before about why the online world is where discussions take place today. And because this is constantly reinforced by the people around me, by the knowledge that I've gained, by the forums I'm reading and by the articles I'm reading about hacking, I'm very likely to believe that this is what I want to do and this is how I should give my part, because maybe maybe not talented as a lot of other things activists can do, but I'm a hacker and I can give my part to the feminist struggle. Right? We also think that I'm very likely to believe the harm these sites are causing is much bigger than the harm that might be from limiting some free speech or whatever, right? We think that when I know that there are men who are going to be more abusive towards the women and not give them the freedom that they need, when I know that there are women who are giving up on their careers, giving up on self-fulfillment, giving up on doing the things that they need, when I know that it is more likely that we have laws against abortions and against preventing sexual harassment in the workplace and against things that I think are super important. I think that these things are limiting the freedoms of people much more than not being able to get my ideas out on a site. I think that these things are really saying that the person cannot fulfill themselves, cannot live their life at all in any way that is free and that is meaningful and that they can self-fulfill themselves, and I feel that is much more important. For all these reasons, we think the feminist hacker should hack these sites. Please propose.
I thank the Prime Minister for a fine speech and call upon the Leader of Opposition to begin the case for the op bench.
Am I audible? Great. I will talk about efficiency, then 1 point of rebuttal, and then I will look at principally what does feminism stand for and what it should stand for. And second, I will look at the outcome of these attacks and why that would be terrible and probably the worst for all of OG's goals. So first, let's assume that OG is successful, that this hacker is successful, as OG claims, in taking down these sites, or at least significantly hampering their ability to reach people, right? it's very unclear why the people behind these websites are just going to give up, right? So probably these websites are going to go back up, probably with better security. It's unclear where this information can just be embedded in already large platforms that are already notoriously hard to hack into, right? Like you might be able to hack the password of someone's Facebook or Twitter account, right? But you can't just hack the entirety of Facebook or Twitter if you don't like something that the user is posting, right? And given password managers and stuff, it's very, very easy for you to just make sure that you put your audience in a place where you can't really be hacked. So I'm unsure why this attack is going to be impactful enough to significantly limit the ability of these websites or of these or of these movements to reach women, right? But secondly, like I was going to explain to you why it's going to leave traces and it's going to be eventually traced back to this feminist hacker, but OG actually wants them to leave alternative information instead. So everyone's going to know who specifically is behind this attack, and everyone is going to be able to blame it on the terrible baddie feminists, which is going to lead to a huge scandal, as I will talk in my outcomes point. One more point of rebuttal to OG, right? So okay, actually two. The first one, minor, just pointing out that ethical hacking also exists. Like just because you have the skills to hack into something doesn't necessarily mean that destroying websites is something that you think is a good thing. But secondly, and I think probably the important rebuttal is that like women who buy into these websites and go on there and keep reading and try to engage with it and listen to it are probably not women who are quite liberal leaning and then, you know, they find this website and suddenly got convinced, right? These, like the target of these websites probably are women that already agree, at least to some extent, to the idea that their roles are to be homemakers and to be submissive to their husbands, right? And I think that actually a lot of them are probably there, not necessarily because they question what decision to make and need support in making sure that they made the right decision, but rather they are there because they have been forced into these roles by their community, by their family, by the situations that their life has been forcing them into. They have probably already decided that you know, going the other way is probably not the correct decision for them, and they are on those websites seeking community, seeking affirmation, seeking someone to make them feel better about their lives. I'm unsure why they're not entitled to have access to this. But let's look at feminism, right? Because I don't think feminism, and I don't think a feminist hacker is presumably not out there to just get random women, right? Like if you join the feminist movement and identify with it, it's your duty to try not to harm the feminist movement. I think the savior complex embedded in the government case is very patronizing and inherently damaging to what the feminist movement should stand for. Because notice, the feminist movement is not about let's make sure women become very liberal and no longer opt into any gender roles that could have been also agreed on by the patriarchy, right? The point of feminism is to empower women to make whatever choice they want to make rather than just make sure that to trap them into another narrative, right? Competing with patriarchy. So that probably means that at the point at which you attack certain women and you decide that they are not entitled to have a place in the conversation about the role of women in society, you have already betrayed the first ideal behind the feminist movement, that women should be enabled to make a choice, right? But also, let's look at the outcome and why it's very unlikely that the outcome is going to be beneficial for either the women that were the target of these websites or for the feminist movement at large. So first, because I think at the point in which these attacks happen, and presumably there is going to be more than one, they're probably going to be large attacks and probably a series of them, because otherwise the motion has no impact on government, right? So that probably means that what you are doing is you end up giving it way more airtime than you would have been likely to get otherwise, because now you turn it into this massive thing that Fox News can pick up and run over and over again, explaining how these terrible feminists who are already attacking all the family values you think are at the core of society and whatever else you believe, and these good women that are out there raising children are now attacked by these terrible feminists. I think this is a horrible weapon that you are putting into their hand to portray, like they are already portraying feminists as dangerous, as these people who are out to get you and to destroy your life as you know it, right? I think this is just a terrible weapon that you put into their hands. But secondly, at the point at which these websites are being portrayed as the victims, the women behind them that are being portrayed as the victims, scrutiny of them is much harder, right? Like presumably if there are moderate women who are genuinely unconvinced, who stumble across these websites, like they might agree with the fact that raising children is great and that probably cooking a meal for your husband is a great thing, but might maybe question some more extreme things about how submissive you should be and should you not have your own free will at all, right? But at the point at which you see the women behind those websites as the victims and you see their values, the values that you agree with, as being attacked, you're much less likely to be inclined to scrutinize them and read through those websites critically. You are much more likely to just accept them and want to defend those women, right? Because I am unclear why being a feminist necessarily has to mean that you have to be liberal or left-wing. I don't think that it's inherently mutually exclusive to both value raising children and cooking for your husband, but also wanting to be treated like a valuable human being, valued and taken seriously if you choose to go into the work, right? So I genuinely don't think that just replacing websites of conservative women that, sure, they might be more radical than I would like them to be, but I'm unsure why taking down their websites and replacing it with, oh, you should be a feminist and a liberal and you should oppose all of these values is going to change anyone's mind, right? Because the ideas that led to the creation of these websites and the ideas that made so many women buy into them so that they want to dedicate a significant amount of time and effort to go online and tell everyone about it isn't going to go away. The kind of support that they have isn't going to go away. And you are probably also hampering your ability to reach conservative women, right? Because I think there are arguably a lot of very vulnerable women that are conservative that would need help to put up with abusive husbands or to put up with oppressive in oppressive households. But I think you turn them away from you at the point at which it looks like you are rejecting them and attacking them simply because they have chosen to value other things than you do. I don't think that there will be any positive outcome. I am very proud to oppose.
I thank the Leader of Opposition for a fine speech and call upon the Deputy Prime Minister to continue the case for the prop bench.
See that. Okay, everything is fine. All right. Okay, starting in 3, 2, 1. Look, I don't know a whole lot about like computers and stuff, but thankfully Netta literally is doing her master's in this. So I'm gonna explain with her words, 1, why this is actually going to be successful and what it is that we actually achieve. 2, why we don't think this backlash issue is so big. In fact, if there's a media frenzy, it's actually gonna be on our side. Lastly, we're gonna deal with the legitimacy. That's what I'm gonna do in my speech. All of my rebuttal will be integrated and it will be beautiful. Let's start with this question of success, because we get the attack that says, well, what, they'll just put it up straight away again. You're just gonna go to your Facebook account, blah, blah, blah. Let's look at the 3 reasons that I'm sure are correct as to why it is that this is actually something that's incredibly difficult for you to stop as this organization. 1, quite frankly, any website that exists has thousands of lines of code, and it is incredibly difficult to notice and recognize what in those can be vulnerable, where you might have mistakes or things like that. This is something that is very, very difficult to do, and there are tons of places for you to attack, and it's almost impossible for you to actually stop at any given one because all of them could be potential vulnerabilities. 2, because people, even if your code is perfect and you somehow, this tiny organization, let's be really honest here, like the organizations that we're talking about are not these massively powerful, like we've all heard of them, have much money thrown behind them organizations. Like, let's be realistic here, right? Even if they somehow have perfect code, we just think that they don't have perfect behavior, right? A lot of the ways that people get in is not to do with the fact that your technology is perfect, but it's the fact that people are dumb and they open emails that they shouldn't email, and they respond to things that they shouldn't respond, and they write their passwords out in really stupid ways that you can guess and things along those lines. That is the way that people get in. And some member of this organization who owns your Facebook account or does these things is going to be vulnerable to one of these options, and that is why it is likely that we're going to succeed time and time again. Thirdly, they just have very limited resources at the end of the day, like as I just said, in terms of who they are, which means that if you're consistently disrupting, if this is something that you're like targeting them for a month and you're just working on doing it and taking them down, etc., you're using up a significant amount of time. You're massively disrupting the manpower that they have to actually be able to achieve any of the other goals or any of the other things that they're actually getting at. And that is why we think that given who these people are and who you are as a hacker with other hacker friends who can do cool things, we think that at that point you are incredibly likely to be successful given how difficult cybersecurity is and given how much massive organizations have failed at it. What does that mean? That means that all of our benefits that went almost entirely unresponded to still stand. This is really, really important because Netta characterizes to you who these kinds of people are and why it is that targeting them is so important. Because what she says is that the people that we're getting at, the people that these websites target, are not just people who are already conservative and 100% believe and are going online to be like, yeah, I already agree, everything is fine, right? Sure, some of those are there and etc. But the reason these organizations bother, the reason they try, is that they find and they focus on those women who are on the edge, those women who have the ability to maybe get out of this mindset, who are in a very vulnerable position in terms of the choices they're making now are going to affect them massively in the future. Like if they're going to have kids and submit to that, or go into a career, or things along those lines that are incredibly difficult to reverse. These women who come from backgrounds that were very conservative, but have maybe been exposed to slightly other things. And what we're doing is we're stopping them maybe from going down the rabbit hole. We're stopping them from taking that decision, and we're stopping them also from entering a social media bubble that they might find it very difficult to get out of. Because the thing is, the way the internet works right now is the more that you click on and the more that you look at certain things that say a certain mindset, the more the rest of the internet works to continue to put you into that rabbit hole. And we say that when we stop that, when we present them with other opinions, that they are likely, some of these women, to maybe click on or maybe look at because they've heard them before, because they potentially agree with them. When we stop them from entering that rabbit hole and when we transfer them to other options and we present them with other arguments that they are somewhat susceptible to, and that is why they're being targeted, that is when we stop some of these women from going. I want to be really clear. This is not a massive, big impact debate that is going to change the world, but we think that that few thousand of women that we are giving that more choice to, that we're giving that more agency to, that is what matters, and that is what is important, and that impact still stands on our side. Secondly, let's engage with backlash, right? Because here they tell us, look, there's going to be a media frenzy around it, blah, 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 and then people are going to feel attacked and everything is going to be told. Like, A, we're not so sure how big the media frenzy is going to be about these tiny organizations that literally no one has ever heard of, but let's say that they are. Why do we not think this is such a big deal? A, because we just don't think that there's a massive delta in terms of the messaging that actually gets out to Fox News viewers or conservatives or etc. We think that those people use any excuse as backlash. They talk about the fact of you wanting to have paternity leave as backlash, about any incentives to get women to the work as the kind of thing that they're attack on our way of life or things along those lines. We think the delta of this big thing of you've taken down these websites that none of us have heard of before is just not such a big deal in terms of the messaging and their ability to convince people. But second of all, we think that a lot of this conversation happens that we care about happens not in Fox News or super conservative place, and also not in the New York Times where literally no one cares. But we think that in the question of when it comes to maybe publications that haven't made up their mind, or people who are reading both or things along those lines, any conversation is good conversation. Why? Because we think that at the end of the day, when people start critically thinking about whether they should be submitting to their husbands, about whether it makes sense for them to have their own choices and their own agency, the more that we're bringing that to the fore and the more discussion that happens, the more we're allowing for those decisions to be made. So we think if there exists any people in the middle who are going to start reading this media frenzy, we think that at that point, those arguments of both sides are going to be presented by those publications insofar as it gets there. And at that point, they're making a decision that makes sense to them. They're making a decision with all views, and we're stopping them once again, as we've said, from entering this bubble specifically of only looking at one side of the argument. And we think that even if that were to happen, that's a positive on our side. Yes, opening? Sure, talk to me.
Miri, are you more likely to agree and listen to me if I shame you or if I give you a conversation?
Great. But here's the thing, because here's the situation, right? We just think, one, that in terms of who it is that we're actually likely to get to, we think that the kinds of people who we are shaming by doing this are incredibly unlikely to listen to us to begin with, right? That is to say that insofar as the people who are really going to feel attacked because they've already super bought into it, they think that it's 100% correct, this is their entire life, our likelihood of convincing them in another way is small. But second of all, we think that we have to attack to an extent. Why do we have to attack to an extent? Because at the end of the day, the ideas that they're spouting and the idea that you need to be dominant, that you should not have this choice, that it is better to submit and that you should not have this agency is something that we're going to have to actively go out and say, no, you are wrong and here is why, and here's why you are deeply wrong. If we just let them live that way, if we just start and speak nice and sort of maybe say words, it is very unlikely that we're going to convince anyone ever. At the end of the day, the only way that you win arguments is by actually having them. And we think that this is the way in which we do it. And importantly, it's, again, the question of where that actual conversation happens is on our side in terms of the way that these discussions happen, in terms of the way that the media creates bubbles. The only way to burst that bubble is to actually be active and attacking. Otherwise, you don't get to those people at all in the first place, or to those people who are on knife's edge, right? Lastly, in terms of whether or not we think this is legitimate, all right, look, because Miri tries to tell us, no, as a feminist, I believe that everyone has choices, blah, blah. I just want to explain what the Infoslide said. The Infoslide doesn't say this is a site that's saying women who want to stay at home and also have kids is also super legitimate. This is an actively anti-feminist website that is actively telling women that they need to be submitting to the husband, that they should not be making their their own choices, all of these things. This is not, as a feminist, something that I believe you have the right to be spouting, something that you, just because you're a woman, it makes sense for you to be encouraging other people to do. It is 100% in my worldview as saying this is a terrible idea that you are actively attacking me in doing, and I have the full right to attempt to take it down to save those women that I can. Please propose.
I thank the DPM for a fine speech and call upon the Deputy Leader of Opposition to conclude the top half.
Ready? Cool. 2 clarifications that are necessary for this debate not to hopefully be a shitstorm. Firstly, yes, the people who set up these websites and run these websites are inherently anti-feminist and use these values to propagate anti-feminism. However, not every person who clicks on this website is anti-feminist and incapable of being a feminist. However, they do click on these websites because they agree with a lot of the values mentioned in the Infoslide. Note, the failure of opening government here is to not recognize that you can be feminist and have those ideals. And at the point where you are a feminist hacker and you shame women for prioritizing family values or prioritizing being fine, possibly subservient to husband in certain cases, and tell them that that is inherently not feminist and you should read my feminist critique on whatever Oxford crap you're sending them, we say that at that point you have failed as a feminist, you have failed as a hacker, and you have lost this debate. It was only one clarification actually, which is very long. All right, cool. Feminist hacking. Feminism is not about picking what women you allow into the conversation. And note, I say conversation because this motion and this policy of this government is not a conversation. It is stopping discussion, it is pressuring people, and it is shaming them for their values. Principally, that is true because they want to close down the means of argumentation of these women, so that is stopping them from talking. And they also want to bombard them in their personal space, i.e. their personal Facebook. They want to go in when they were not invited to have a conversation, to have a air quotes are so annoying in online debating, a fake conversation online, right? Cool. So it's not disagreeing or conversing. It is overshadowing. It is silencing. I say that, first of all, just on a principle level, it is illegitimate to attempt to silence anyone you might disagree with, because for 2 reasons. First of all, it is wrong then to expect the same in return. As a feminist, I want those who disagree with me to listen to me because I want more people to be able to come in to the feminist movement. At the point where I deny someone else that right, I then don't deserve it back to me. But second of all, just on this note of what Netta said about the oppressors being able to use these websites to legitimize what they're doing, someone has their mic unmuted, or I don't know, quiet if you do. Second, what Netta said about oppressors being able to use this website to legitimize being shitty to their wives. I think equally that is more so true of this, right? Now oppressors can say, we're not listening to feminists because they won't listen to us. They won't listen to our wives. Why would we ever listen to them? Also being able to point out that they're principally inconsistent. Yes, I know lots of men are principally inconsistent, but they have the privilege of getting to do that because they are the privileged people who write our laws. When you are someone fighting to change the laws, you need to be more principally consistent because you need to stand behind the values that you are trying to install in society and change, right? Men have the right to be hypocrites, feminists don't. It's very sad. Okay, proclaiming yourself as a feminist might not mean that you, because obviously assumedly for after debates to work, this person has proclaimed themselves as a feminist. It's not just like we think they're a feminist hacker. So proclaiming yourself as a feminist, it might not mean that you actively have to do certain things, but it does mean that you actively have to try not to hurt the feminist movement, right? You have to try not go against the ideals you have proclaimed yourself to believe, right? So it does mean you have a duty, first of all, not to harm the women involved, but also not to shame women. Sorry, that's the harming women thing, but also not to harm the movement, right? Ultimately, I think as a woman who has managed to become, as Netta put it, quite a kick-ass hacker, you're quite privileged in comparison to these women that you believe that you should be saving, right? So this is not just that the savior complex that Miri talks about is quite problematic in and of itself, but it's also this idea that as a hacker, oh yeah, this is the other thing, right? So Netta says as a hacker, you've read lots of like feminist or hacker theory and stuff. A couple of things on hacking theory. You're meant to punch up, not down. You're meant to try and dismantle the establishment, not harm the people you're trying to save. Ultimately, if opening government, and that's the culmination of that long rant, is ultimately, if opening government believes that these conservative women who get trapped, air quotes again, in this website, are victims who ought to be saved, or oppressed people who ought to be taught a better way, your duty is not to harm them. And I say at the point where you shame them, because ultimately this is shaming, it is stopping someone the right to have a defense of because shame is stopping someone the ability to have a defense, right? It's saying there is no defense to your own opinion. You have no place in my movement as long as you have these opinions. And ultimately we say that's wrong. That is wrong. It is punching down. Because even if closing government want to stand up and say, oh, we're not shaming the opinions, we're just showing them that maybe they need to change a little bit or whatever, right? Two things on this. It will be perceived as shame. You were stepping into my personal Facebook. I did not ask this weird feminist hacker to come and have a conversation with me and enlighten me on her opinion of what I should be doing with my life. Equally, if I am a person on the fence, as Opening Government phrased it, I'm unlikely to listen at the point where I feel like I'm being bombarded and attacked. Just on a human level, people back down from that. But also one of the biggest critiques the feminist movement has is that they're crazy, angry women who don't listen. This is framing yourself as an attacker, as a negative oppressor, not as an inclusive group that is trying to invite people in. You're ultimately trying to push opinion out and people out. Do closing have anything? Cool. If you can have something in 30 seconds, cool. If not, also cool. Cool. So where's my second page? There it is. Right, let's talk about reaction, right? Ultimately, we do think this gives a bigger reaction. And Miri just kind of washes this away and says, oh, well, we've never heard of it, so Fox won't care. A couple of things on this. Have you met Fox? Have you met Trump? Have you met all these people? They love picking random niche stories and going, look, the crazy liberals are at it again. The crazy bitches are trying to ruin everything for us. Sorry if you're offended by the word bitches. We say that at that point, you give them a far bigger platform than they've ever had. Yeah, sure, I'd never heard about this before, but you know who will hear about this hacking? Trump or Fox. Because whilst they might have lots of hacking knowledge, they forget that somebody can send an email to Fox News saying, sorry, you're out of time now, CG. Someone can send an email to Fox and go, oh, the feminists try to shut me down. Do you want to maybe do an op-ed on that? Do you want to do a piece on that? And that gives a much bigger platform, but also frames the conversation in the language of the oppressors, in the language of the privileged people. This feminist hacker stole our website, took our website. But lastly, on success, I'm just going to posit that a lot of you are students who couldn't afford, or were students at one point, who couldn't afford streaming services and used illegal movie streaming services. Yes, they got locked down a lot through all the things Miri and Netta talked about, but the movement of streaming did not get locked down, right? 123 Movies just had a different server every couple of weeks, right? Yes, you can attack individual servers. You can't attack the existence of this movement or the existence of this idea. You give it more fire at the point where you get Trump behind them, you get Fox behind them. They're the people with the money who will give them the money for new servers. This is a stupid idea. Silly idea, naive.
I thank the Deputy Leader of Opposition for a fine speech and call upon the Member of Government to extend the case for the prop bench.
Panel, two things in this speech. First, I'll explain why we believe that even if you're not able to completely destroy them, and even if, say, they still have to move their servers every couple of weeks, but they can still put out their message, why the things we're doing are the crucial difference, which makes their message far less likely to actually penetrate vulnerable people. And secondly, we'll explain more about the role of feminism, especially why, if you care about choices, and especially given the most vulnerable women out the choices, you should actually side with the government. So firstly, why we believe that actually we are making a crucial difference. So notice that in the top half, there's sort of an unresolved clash as to how effective this is going to be. It's not really clear whether you're going to absolutely shut them down or whether you're just going to make them like some banners that are not really like all that prominent on the side or whatever, or just like, again, as we just got an example, just shutting down the servers for a couple of weeks and then them returning. Notice that what we tell you is that you don't actually need to completely shut them down. We tell you that giving this sort of just even one banner actually does make the crucial difference. Why is this the case? This is because the way programming works. So before we start, it's just one very important note. We're most likely not going to change the people behind this content because the people that are making the content are like literally committing massive amounts of time. They're willing to put their ideals out there. They're likely the most committed person, so they're not going to change on either side of the house. We believe the most important people then are the people that are on the fence, the people that are moderates, the people that are maybe exploring those things. We talk especially people like informative stages of the life or that are confused for whatever reason and so on and so forth. Once those people, then how does programming work? Note also, these are really extreme ideas, right? Because obviously you still have like a lot of patriarchal societies, but these Tradwife people are literally saying that you should go back to the ideas from 70 years ago, right? And even in popular culture nowadays, you mostly have this hegemonic idea that like the ideas from 70 years ago were like probably not very good and like actually probably quite bad. And so we tell you this is actually a huge thing that you have to convince a lot of people of, because even if you do think that like staying at home is fine or whatever, the idea that you should submit to your husband for everything and like always be a submissive partner and not have any sort of choice on your own, even for people that want to stay at home, is quite a radical idea. Therefore, you have to have really careful programming. You have to control the environment in which these people are in. I'll take opening like in 2 minutes. You have to control the environment in which they're in. You have to control the social circle of these people. You have to, and it probably takes like a long time, right? You have to control those environmental factors, and you have to, and like it won't work overnight, but slowly you'll most likely convince them of that idea through also things like shaming people that don't believe in that idea themselves, and so on and so forth. And so you need total control for these things to work, because again, they're so radical and it's such a massive leap from current society. Therefore, we tell you that you don't need to just completely shut them down. The moment at which you're capable of putting like statistics about things like the issue with domestic violence, or just stories linking to YouTube of feminists talking about bad things that can happen, not just when people stay at home, but when people completely take away any sort of agency for themselves and so on. We believe that this environment in which they have built and which they need in order to program people just literally fades away. And sure, again, they can still put out their message, but they no longer have access to that purpose-built environment in order to make that message convincing. So again, this is a crucial thing we're bringing you. It's not necessary for them to be shut down like all you have. It's enough for us to go into that environment for that to make actually a massive difference. Also notice that we don't necessarily have to shame them. We don't have to say like personally insult them or whatever. Again, we can just do things like with statistics. Also notice that it's not that like these people that are watching are necessarily ones that dislike confrontation, because again, the people giving the message oftentimes are also saying very confrontational things. And I'll explain more about this later. They're often shaming a lot of other people, and they're basing their ideas on those things. Before I continue to the second argument, I'll take opening.
So if your logic of your argument is you want to convince conservative women that they don't have to live these negative lifestyles, then they don't view the content as shaming. They view it as agreeing with them, right? So you are the shamer. You are validating all of Trump and Fox, who says feminists are angry women you shouldn't be living. Be inclusive, not aggressive.
Okay, so a couple of things. First, again, we're talking about really extreme people that are preying on really vulnerable people. We believe that even if some people might agree with those ideas, again, doing things like saying people are degenerates, people that are not LGBT or whatever, alternates and so on, is actually quite shameful. Actually, that goes to the second argument that I'll be better explain there. So going into the second argument, what is the role of feminism and why we believe choice feminism is much better under our side of the house? So 3 things here. First, notice that these pages are actively anti-feminist. They're actively trying to destroy the feminist movement and fighting the values for which the feminist movement stands for. Notice that if you want to have any sort of feminist movement, you need to be able to build coalitions. You need to be able to have some sort of allies. The moment at which these people are literally attacking your capacity to do so, it's probably in your interest to, attack them back and take away the capacity in order to do so. But also notice that the very worldview from which they come from is actually one that is quite problematic. Notice that they idealize this traditional life from the 50s, and they idealize the traditional nuclear family. Notice that idealizing those things is inherently anti-choice. Notice that there are many people and many women that don't fall within those categories of the ideal social family. It often runs across lines such as race, for example, but also probably more importantly for the feminist movement, it runs across like LGBT women or like trans women who don't neatly fall into those parameters of what traditional families are. So then we tell you that the moment in which you're actually not attacking them, you're making it harder for those other women that don't fit into the parameters of what these other women, these Tradwife women want. You make it actually far harder for those women to feel included within the feminist movement, for them to feel like they have a personal choice in other aspects of their life. Again, especially because they also usually oppose modern culture and they associate modern culture with like degeneracy and all of that nonsense that they say. Again, notice we think those are actually quite harmful. Also, we tell you that we don't think this is likely to harm the feminist movement strategically in other ways, especially directly clashing with things we got from the opposition regarding things like whether Fox News will do so. Well, people like Fox News or Trump are not known for their journalistic standards. And again, given that they're willing to just take any possibly niche thing, if they cannot take this possibly niche thing, they'll take some other niche thing. Why is it that this specific thing is actually the worst thing? We actually have no idea. Again, we tell you that we are actually making a difference here because we don't have to completely destroy them or completely shut them down. The moment at which we're just able to no longer give them the environment to propagate their ideas, it makes it far harder for other people to be programmed them into it. So ultimately, why should you vote for closing government? Because irrespective of the top of flash of whether this is effective or not entirely, we show you that it only has to be even a little bit effective for it to make a massive difference. And secondly, because we truly care about choice. And sometimes you have to make some trade-offs. You cannot give choice to absolutely everyone. And if we are going to do so, we would rather give it to the more women that are in like really vulnerable position, like trans women or LGBT women, and so on and so forth. So I'm so very proud to propose.
I thank the member of government for a fine speech and call upon the member of opposition to extend the case for the op bench.
Okay, is everyone ready? All right. Simply the act of hacking prominent right-wing websites attracts the ire of right-wing hackers, creating enormous personal risk for feminist leaders, yourself, and your family. This far outweighs the discursive impacts that are vague and uncertain. We will have direct, clear ways that this results in harm. 2 points of extension. Firstly, backlash, but direct backlash from right-wing hackers and why it will ruin your life and the lives of people you love. And 2, all of the very many other things you could be doing as a feminist hacker and why literally all of them are better than this. Okay, first. So we're going to beat OO in backlash because OO's backlash is vague and about discourse. It is uncertain. Just the fact that there has been 2 gov teams against it means that we can't really know for sure how discourse is going to change. We probably do side with opening opposition and agree that this will probably be good for discourse to shut down these or bad for discourse to shut down these websites. However, it is far worse for your direct safety and the direct safety of other people around you. So our backlash is more impactful than theirs. So basically, this puts a target sign on you and the feminist movement in general, because right-wing hackers will feel a duty and a desire to take revenge on you. They will feel a desire to stick up for websites that they like, and they will feel a desire to do to you what you have done to them, because humans tend to have a desire for reciprocity. And this is really important because right-wing hackers are willing to do things that you as a feminist hacker are probably not. They are willing to dox people. They're willing to create an army of bot accounts to harass people. They're willing to like send you emails with like child pornography that you open and then like you have to see something terrible. They're willing to send embarrassing information to your employers to get you fired. They are really very good at ruining lives, and you have given them the motive to. And this plays out in a couple ways. Firstly, this draws their ire onto feminist leaders, because at the point at which you have entered hacking into the like battleground of the feminist versus anti-feminists, they are likely to see attacking feminist leaders as responding in kind. And it is not uncommon for feminist leaders to be harassed off of Twitter, to have their lives ruined because someone happened to attract their ire by hacking. If you do this in the name of the feminist movement, they will attack anyone related to it and ruin their lives as a result. This is like, if you are a feminist, if the actor in this debate is a feminist, you probably have an enormous interest in that not happening, because you are then damaging the feminist movement by firstly creating a disincentive to speak out in favor of feminism, because you know that you might get your life ruined if you become too prominent. And second, it means that there are just less people speaking out because they have been bullied and harassed off the internet, meaning that the feminist movement is just generally less effective. But I think more importantly, this is you directly who is harmed by this. You yourself are there will probably be a fair number of hackers who are trying to find you, and you will probably at some point make some mistake, even if you're really smart, as OG said. It is very difficult to completely prevent them from finding out who you are. And if that happens, your own life will be ruined. These awful things will happen to you. You could lose your job, and it won't be just you, it will be your family, because once they know who you are, they can target your family. They can get your parents fired. They can get your spouse fired. If you have children, they can send creepy and threatening messages to them. And here's the weighing on this. Like, I think there are very few people who are willing to have their own lives ruined for a vague discursive benefit. This is like most people do, like a lot of people do want to do activism, especially when they feel strongly about a philosophy, but very few people are willing to have their lives ruined for it. And this is not a sacrifice that you will probably feel you have any moral obligation to take, especially since, as I highlighted at the top of my speech, even if you succeed, the benefits are rather vague, and to discourse, it is hard to prove that this actually benefits anyone directly. Certainly it doesn't benefit anyone directly. Hard to prove that it benefits anyone at all. Okay, second point. all of the other things you could be doing as a hacker. And and the final thing I'll highlight is if this backlash does happen to you, you can't be a hacker anymore because hacking is illegal and now your identity is out there. Anonymity is really important to hackers. And so this prevents you from doing all of these other good things you've been doing. And you're also prevented from doing all these other things because big sites often have lots of security and they've seen most of the tricks that hackers are likely to use. Excuse me, meaning that it takes a lot of time and effort to do these sites, and you have to put in that time and effort for every individual site. And it's like playing whack-a-mole. So this takes significant time away from other good things you could be doing. What are those other good things? So if you're going to use your hacking skills to take down websites, I think there are far better options. What about like child pornography or human trafficking websites? Those seem like far better options to take down because for two reasons. First, it is far more clear that they are directly harming people. If you can take them down for even a few hours, you might prevent, for example, a transaction from happening that actually like really helps someone. Or if you make it harder for these websites to operate, less of these things are produced, meaning that like actual people's lives are significantly improved when those people are going through abuse. And the other reason it's better is that it's far less likely to engender backlash because the people who are behind these websites know that they are really easy to dox. If you get their personal information, you can go to the police and you have a clear big illegal thing that they're doing. And so they're like unlikely to want to retaliate against you because they risk that threat. Before I go on, does anyone have a POI? Opening, yeah.
Yeah, masking myself through VPN and thousands of temporary IP addresses is not difficult if you're not up against the FBI, but crazy feminist, anti-feminist hackers have a million other reasons to randomly want to attack women on the internet. There is no difference in my taking this specific action.
Okay, but when you have lots of, you're hacking in a very prominent public way, and when you have lots of people who are probably going to not like the fact that you were doing that, the odds that you will make some kind of small mistake that leads to at least one of those many people figuring out who you are is fairly high. And note that even if I can't prove that this is 100% definitely going to happen, the risk of it is enormous because it ruins your life and prevents you from ever hacking again. I don't think that is a risk worth taking for vague discursive benefits. Okay, but like let's talk about other ways you can use your hacking abilities besides just taking down websites that, for all the reasons I explained before, trade off with doing this. You can do things like leak information that, for example, if a company is being investigated for sexual assault, you can leak their emails showing them trying to cover it up between each other. You can leak embarrassing information from anti-feminist politicians that ruins their careers. These are, again, unlikely to engender backlash because politicians and big companies don't have the legitimacy to do that. And when these become news stories, the news, like the story is rarely about the hacking, it's always about that company or that politician. This is a far better use of your time because it creates a deterrent against ever doing those bad things again, against companies or politicians abusing their power in this way, and it concretely helps people at the point at which these people are held to account. This is, again, a far better use of your power, even if there was no backlash, because it just takes less time and doesn't have the discursive harms that opening opposition talked about. I'm really proud to oppose.
Eventually, I thank the member of opposition for a fine speech and call upon the government whip to conclude the prop bench.
Yes. If you could wave at me with a paper with a POI, and I'm going to be taking it at round like 5. I might even ask, but don't text the chat. I'm not going to look at it. I'm going to do 3 things in a summary. First, I'm going to talk about what are the groups, what are the people these groups are targeting or these sites are targeting and why they are specifically so vulnerable. Second, what are the ideas they are promoting, something Raf explicitly explains for the first time in CG. And lastly, what are our messages going to look like and why they are going to be specifically effective. Before that, I'm going to respond to the CEO's argument about the right-wing hackers backlash. The main response on this is we just do not think that this is something that's going to make a massive difference about how we are in danger of hackers, right? Like, I just going to posit that I do not think that Tradwives tend to be great hackers, nor I think they are friends with too many hackers. And I don't think that audiences tend to be full of really skillful hackers. Because of that, like OG already explains why you need like money, you need some knowledge, things like that. We don't think that like this is specifically the thing that like all these hackers are going to go
and attack you. We think there are other reasons why, like, as a feminist, you would be probably a target of right-wing hackers anyway, especially if Steve wants to suggest that you should instead like attack right-wing politicians. We think that probably makes a much bigger backlash. So we don't think this is the tipping point where like you should be like scared of it. You're probably already used to the fact that that risk exists. I think specifically when like the alternative is like you should target CP sites or human trafficking sites, right? They are right that these people probably not going to go to the police, but like they are probably significantly more dangerous insofar as what they can do to you and in opposition, right? Like those tend to be people who are one, dangerous, two, probably really, really tech savvy. And so far as like to even do the things they're doing, they probably need to like know how to operate at the dark web. Like I think if a CEO wants to suggest these things and at the same time claim that the most important impact is that you might be a target of right-wing hackers, they contradict themselves massively and they're out of this debate. Let's talk then about who are these groups that people are targeting, because I think that Raf gives the most nuanced explanation of it, and I think that the opening government doesn't. Opening opposition says that those are women who already kind of believe these ideas and they will feel like they are being shamed. We think that like there's a much more nuanced characterization about what are the specific groups these Tradwife websites are targeting. We think these are twofold. One, we think that tends to be like very young girls in their formative years. It's like if you look at like YouTube channels like Girl Defined, if you look at Mrs. Midwest, tends to feature like young women who talk about makeup, talk about modest clothing, which is often like really easy to come across if you're a 14-year-old who grew up in like even slightly religious background. No, thank you later. Those tend to be people who are incredibly like impressionable. They are not like set on the fact they want to be a wife, but it's something that are really easy to come across. And once you get into that and start buying into these ideas, they are like the Tradwife sites are promoting, you're much less likely to ever get out of it. Second thing, we then say that it's about women who are in vulnerable states, right? Very often women who go through like issues in their lives, who are very likely to buy into it because as O agrees, they are seeking affirmation, right? People like the Transphobe wife literally label themselves like, your life is probably going awful because you are submitting to the current degenerate culture. Listen to what I am telling you. I'm going to get you out of this with my narrative. We think because of that, like, oh, it's not right that we are talking about people who already agree. We are talking about people who are specifically incredibly vulnerable, and any sort of difference in a different message that you can bring them can get them out of possibly getting into really, really problematic rabbit hole. Let's talk about that then, because I think Raf is the first one who explains what actually are the ideas these people are promoting and why they're so incredibly harmful. Because like O says, like you can be a feminist and have those ideas anyway. Like, know that this just doesn't explain the extent to which these messages tend to be incredibly harmful. Because once you are on these websites and you start consuming these ideas, it means that you often like just get ideas that completely contradict anything that is feminist. Raf tells you a couple of things. One, they are often incredibly homophobic and incredibly transphobic ideas, because the idea of like traditional family tends to like exclude people who are outside of that narrative, right? Second, like it's often shames women who go to universities or choose to like pursue their careers, even if just for a bit, right? And telling them that not like real women and they're going against like God's design for femininity. I mean, that's obviously really problematic. And there are like extreme examples where the Transphobe wife literally posited that like marital rape is not a thing. We think it's incredibly problematic narratives that like you just like for feminist movement, it is incredibly problematic to have anyone going into that rabbit hole. We think that like if opening opposition cares about inclusion, we think indoctrination of these ideas excludes so many vulnerable women, right? You are much more likely to have things like more attacks or more shaming on LGBT individuals once you have people subscribing to those ideas, women subscribing to those ideas, like, and projecting them in their daily lives. Like it means that like the kids that these women are going to have are less likely to be like ever permitted or encouraged to go to universities or pursue educations. Those are people who have no choice, right? And like because of that, we think that there's an obligation from the feminist movement and from you as a feminist to protect these women. We think that like all those people who are more likely to be target of those ideas matter equally as like inclusion of potentially conservatives. Before I go on how our messages look like, I would like to engage with opening up.
Politicians, those in power, and those that the people you want to save trust already have historically always used hypocrisy and aggression in struggle against people in their fight. You need to be inclusive. You need to be consistent. You are losing.
Yeah, no, sure. Like we are saying that we are being inclusive. Like I don't think that like they say what the message is gonna look like, because like O says you're gonna alienate them, they're gonna feel shame. Like know that like it's obvious that you don't have to put like radical left-wing counterexamples and left-wing counter narratives on those websites. I'm gonna posit that if you are a feminist hacker, you're probably reasonably smart and you like understand what kind of groups and what kind of people you are dealing with. What this means is that like when you're gonna be putting the banners, you can like link to existing religious progressive narratives. There is like bunch of like LGBT accepting progressive Christians look like God is grey. All those people are like, those are narratives and like information that you can put on those websites and just present a counter narrative. It doesn't have to be like, we are shaming you, right? Which means that like you can change these people's opinions just to move them a little bit. This is not shaming, because you are not saying being a wife is an actively awful choice. You are countering their narrative when they say, if you are not a wife, you are shameful and you are not a correct and right kind of a woman. We think that's something really, really good. I think Raf's extension explains crucially how exactly these sites work and why they specifically need to have the monopoly on information they are providing you, and why specifically just having a little banner or something that's like able to get you out of that monopoly is going to be specifically effective. This was more nuanced than what opening government gave you. Look, we are not going to alienate anyone. We're not going to receive the backlash Op wants to tell you, but we can get people out of awful rabbit holes if we do that now. Proud to propose.
I thank the government for a fine speech, and call upon the opposition whip to conclude the semi-final.
Can everyone hear me? Okay, I'm just starting a timer. In this speech, I'm first going to respond to opening government, then I'm going to address opening opposition, or closing government, which is quite derivative, but they add a little bit new things. And then I'm going to explain why our case is ultimately not adequately responded to and very much should win this round on any metric which has been thrown out in this debate. So on opening government, what do we have? They tell you that we're going to effectively take down these sites, and they give like 3 reasons why you might be able to, like they're vulnerable, people are dumb, and that they have limited resources. But they don't respond to any of like the logical reasons of why this might not actually do anything. And their conclusion is that they're going to change the belief of vulnerable women who are going to now not somehow be like misogynist towards themselves and not have like some values or beliefs that they otherwise would have had. Oh, the closing makes the same argument, but really just says like why women might be vulnerable and like these websites are bad. But we'll address why in with this case. So the first reason this makes no sense is that you're essentially playing whack-a-mole with websites. Once you close it down, it'll just spring up again just a minute later. They don't explain to you why the temporary closing of some websites is actually going to do anything in the larger context. But second, there's a selection bias in which these websites are very niche. The people who go to them already have the views which they espouse. Even if you are to take down one of these websites and the person somehow does not look at any of the other websites, it tends to be that that person already has that belief. It tends to be that that belief is reinforced by their family, their friends, their colleagues, and the information they receive through media outlets and the information they consume on a regular basis. These tend to be worldviews which lead people to these websites. These websites do not create the worldviews in and of themselves. They're very niche, and you have to search for them to find them. So it's a very low impact on how many people view these, and it's even lower on how many people view these by accident with like the most willing minds. And we say they're unlikely to actually really be persuaded by them because people have short-term focus, and any individual website has never really changed anyone's entire worldview. I just can't think of any reason why it would. And finally, if the third reason is that it's just one website. Even if these people like are looking at these websites seriously, they're likely to look at another one. So they say that you can hack these women and like give them personal messages to oppose this. At that point, you alienate them because you say that not only is like some feminist hacking the website you're reading at the moment, but this feminist is also hacking into your Facebook and sending you creepy messages like, don't follow the right-wing way, like these weird, like ominous statements, and you're actively being hacked. At that point, you view the feminist as like an antagonist, and as a feminist, which means you probably associate antagonism to feminism if you're making those very easy associations anyway with your current website viewing. So this really doesn't make any sense, and they're only causing harm to the potential women who they're messaging and they're trying to convince off these sites. But then and also the men are going to have these views too, and the men also live in these worlds where all the views are reinforced on them by every other facet of life. They don't explain why websites are unique. The closing team says they say a few different ways of saying it. They say that we don't need to shut these websites down. We just need to temporarily close them. Or what I think they said that they're not going to reopen the website if it gets hacked once because they don't want to. That doesn't really make much sense. Once you take down a website, it's only hours so it comes back up again. It happens to every website, big and small, and for a bunch of different reasons. And websites generally have mirrors, so even if you hack them, they have other outlets in which they can, other URLs in which they can open. So you really are having no impact on the websites themselves. I don't think they're really estimating how much they're shutting, how little they're shutting these things down. But then they say that these pages are very anti-feminist, and they give reasons why, they're anti-trans. No trans woman, I'm just gonna say, is going to probably look out for these types of websites. And if they do, they probably have that worldview already. Because what do you type into Google to find this super misogynistic anti-women websites? I don't know, and I don't think the specific people they're talking about would do so either. And they don't really address any of this. They kind of just assert that there's going to be these women, and they assert that they exist, but they don't really explain to you why they overcome these boundaries. And then so obviously these websites are bad. Obviously these websites are anti-feminist, but that doesn't really matter if the people viewing them are also anti-feminist. Their impact is that they they reach vulnerable women. OG says that you're going to message those vulnerable women. We say that only creates antagonism and harm, and that's really only weird. And they say we have an obligation to protect these women, but we don't know which women we're helping. We're going to blindly try to hack every woman, so we think we might be able to protect one. We say you're probably harming them by hacking them. So on our case, they tell you a few things. They say that in response to the backlash, other people will hack you anyway. But this is not really the case, because you're hacking anti-woman honeypots where everyone who has this view is conglomerated, and they're all tech savvy, and you're probably going to have some degree of hackers who will try to attack you. So it is for unique to this. And if you're going to attack a website or leak confidential data that shows someone's abused woman from a company, right-wing anti-women hackers aren't going to go after those abstract companies that they probably view as left-wing anyway, to take down the hacker who exposed them. The conversation when you take down a figure, a prominent person who has done this, is on the figure or the company. The conversation is not about the hacker themselves. In their world, they have conversations about hacking minor websites. And we would say that, so the backlash only really happens to you personally in this world, where you're attacking these websites. That's really bad, because as a hacker, you're fundamentally concerned with your own safety, your own anonymity, because that's the only way you can hack. And insofar as you put your security behind you, you are harming yourself as a hacker. And this is not something you would do as a hacker or as a logical person. And if we're two sides, the angel and the devil, debating about what this individual hacker should do, you should probably listen to the one who tells you avoid the massive risk and don't destroy your family and yourself lives and prevent yourself from ever hacking again. So in the interest of hacking, in the interest of feminism, in the interest of your personal safety, you really are interested in not having your personal safety an anonymity unleashed. But then in response to the alternatives, they say they're more dangerous, but they don't respond to the fact that you have their personal information. As OG says, you can find every one of the company's personal info. You can probably do that with these websites, and you have them doing illegal activity. So they're probably not going to come on you because you can threaten police action. But even if they do try to attack you, turn them in, because you have all their personal information. It doesn't make any sense, because OG says you have all these capabilities. Then why not just turn in people that are doing crimes that are very bad? They don't explain why this is the best possible use of our feminist hacking capabilities. They just say that we have an obligation to do it. If we're an aid worker, we have an obligation to help people, but it doesn't mean we have an obligation to help in small ways. We have an obligation to help in meaningful ways. And so in the worst case scenario, even if it's the same degree of risk, we say that we're having a better impact, because we're directly helping women by what we're doing. We can hack victims, people who've been victim of sexual assault, not hack them, but hack the people who assaulted them. We can expose people who have done wrongdoings. We can do things that actually help people. But our impacts also outweigh the vague discourse that we get from these people, from the other teams, because our impacts cannot be undone. Once these websites are taken down, they go back up again. But once you leak something, it cannot be unleaked. Our impacts actually help people, and they have sustainable, lasting results. And they don't respond to the fact that you put other feminist leaders at risk, because you spark these high-profile cases where you're just taking down honeypots of anti-woman thought. And in the interest of yourself and of feminism and of your most productive use of time, we proudly oppose.
I thank the opposition whip for a fine speech and everyone for what was an excellent debate. I hope everyone watching on the stream and here also enjoyed it as much as I did. So woo, well done, everybody. Right, I think we're going somewhere. You should all go somewhere and get like a break and some stuff, refreshments, energy.
Thank you.
We'll see you later.